Good morning and welcome to the Bulwark podcast. It's Monday and everybody woke up this morning, right? They woke up and the first thing that they saw when they opened up the Bulwark was this screaming headline. Donald Trump is now the odds-on favorite to be president in 2025 by Tim Miller. So, yeah, it's a good day to go back to bed early. Joining me on there's so much to talk about today. So, coming from behind the paywall, the secret podcast, the next level podcast, JVL joins us on this podcast. So, happy Monday morning.
Happy Monday. Are you did you I wanted to ask you, how was the grandkids first they're a little young for actual sugar consumption, but I assume your
Hope
son
so.
put the grandbabies into cute little baby Halloween costumes?
Absolutely. Charlotte went out as a lion, and Amelia went out as a skunk.
Nice.
So it was very, very nice. And they were out there, and Charlotte didn't want to take off the lion costume. I think it's her new favorite costume now. So
I hope she never does.
This may be a thing. And of course, here at my house in Wisconsin, I think we continued our streak now of 0 people coming to the door,
Really?
which is okay. You know, I mean, we have
like-
we have a long driveway. We live in the woods. We have scary dogs. So, you know,
I feel like this is a Robert Putnam bowling alone kind of example, you know, the death of trick-or-treating.
well, I don't know. Actually, but there's not the death of trick-or-treating because the community just to the north of us, Cedarburg, has this, they call it the pumpkin walk. And all the kids come out and they go up and down Main Street, and all the businesses come out and they have the buckets and everything. And so it's like the entire community comes together. And it was, you have that feeling, this is America. This is the way America's supposed to be. It was just good.
Yeah, I guess. I've been a little bit freaked by the rise of the trunk or treating as opposed to the trick or treating, and because that feels more like the organized. I mean, we want the organic things, right? The organic house to house, little platoons, all that stuff, not the semi-organized big government trunk or treating kind of thing.
You know, see, so I'm old enough to remember when we went out by ourselves at night. I mean, first of all, it was really fun to go out at night, and it never occurred to anyone to have your parents come along with you. And that's just like a totally different era now. I mean, just I wouldn't even think of it now. I'm not being judgmental about it because I wouldn't, send my grandkids out without an adult. But back in the day, we ran with scissors.
You weren't scared of the urban stories about people who put razor blades in the apples they give you? You can't, you don't remember any of these things that before your time? Or after your time, I should say.
In my day, nobody handed out apples. Okay. I mean, I remember when the first fruit was like, what is this? What fresh hell? What innovation is this? They're giving us apples. Exactly. All right. So we have a lot to talk about. We have the Virginia election yesterday. We have some gruesome polls for Joe Biden. I want to get your take on, obviously, this debate about the Trumpian restoration. The Atlantic magazine, normally level-headed, advising never Trumpers out there that this is a great time to get behind Ron DeSantis. I have some issues with that. I want to talk about that. But late on Friday morning, while we were actually taping this podcast, we got the news that Adam Kinzinger, who's a friend of this podcast, who will be on shortly, we're gonna book him back on, Republican congressman from Illinois, became the latest casualty, or maybe that's putting it too negative. Let's say the latest sane Republican to self-deport himself from the Republican Party, or at least elected office in the Republican Party. He announced he's not running for re-election. Not a huge shock, considering that he would face a tough primary. And the Democrats had decided basically to screw him over with redistricting. But Adam Kinzinger was on with George Stephanopoulos yesterday, and Stephanopoulos asked Kinzinger if he'd handed Trump a win by announcing that he wasn't running again. Trump actually issued a statement: 2 down, 8 to go, in reference to the 10 Republicans who'd voted for impeachment. This is what Kinzinger had to say.
If he runs in 2024, he'll be the front runner, no doubt. But I think the Republican establishment now, whether it's the NRCC, whether it's Kevin McCarthy, have held on to Donald Trump. They have continued to breathe life into him. And so actually, it's not really handing a win as much to Donald Trump as it is to the cancerous kind of lie and conspiracy, not just wing anymore, but mainstream argument of the Republican Party. This is not on, the 10 of us that voted to impeach. It's not on Liz Cheney and I to save the Republican Party. It's on the 190 Republicans who haven't said a dang word about it, and they put their head in the sand and hope somebody else comes along and does something.
Yeah, so JVL, nobody else is coming along, are they? Like waiting for Godot.
Mitt Romney ain't walking through that door. No, this is, I would actually go a step further than Adam does here, though, which is to say it's not even about the other 190 Republicans. It's about the 74 million Republican voters who want this. I mean, this is the power flows upward from the people. And if Republican voters want this stuff, then they're going to get candidates and elected officials who give it to them. And we used to live in a world where the parties had a good deal of power. Remember, the party decides and all that. And that isn't the world we live in anymore. We've really thoroughly democratized our political nominating process, and we've moved a lot of the power away from the party infrastructure itself. That's funny. That's one of the big lessons of the Virginia race, actually, is that Glenn Youngkin is only possible because the Virginia Republican Party didn't let Republican voters pick the nominee. This is, otherwise they would have had a full MAGA candidate. So this is going to happen everywhere. It's like you guys talked about this on the show last week with Mitch McConnell embracing Herschel Walker. It's because Mitch McConnell is not in charge, and the people who vote for Herschel Walker are.
So I'm going to get to Virginia in just a second, but Tim's piece leading the Bulwark today, that Donald Trump is now the odds-on favorite to be president in 2025. I agree with him, and I don't think it's alarmist. And he says this is a wake-up call that people should, start taking really, effing seriously the notion that a guy who incited a deadly mob at the Capitol in an attempt to overthrow our democracy is the front runner to become president again. And then he gives out some advice. Democrats might want to focus more on competence and broadening their appeal rather than participating in an internecine murder-suicide over how many trillions of dollars they spend. Media should probably start treating Trump like the front runner he is rather than the drunk uncle whose deranged ravings can be ignored. Most importantly, and this is what you were just getting at here, Republican politicians and commentators and voters who claim they don't want a wannabe authoritarian lunatic to become president again should probably do something to try and stop it. And he's right on all of those accounts. But over the weekend, I see, Senator Tim Scott is preemptively saying, well, of course I'll vote for Donald Trump in 2024 if he runs. I mean, they're like giving it away to him.
Yeah, I mean, no surprise there. I mean, Tim Scott wouldn't even say that Donald Trump lost the election. I mean, this guy's just utterly craven. And I don't, the problem is that there's only one logical place to go if you do believe this stuff. And that logical place is leaving Conservatism Inc. and leaving the Republican Party. And for a lot of people, that just isn't possible. Like they're so wedded to the constructs that they grew up with. They're so wedded to their own tribal loyalties, and that stuff just doesn't die easily. Because to do that, as you and I can tell people from experience, you've got to lose a bunch of friends. Maybe if you work in Conservatism Inc., you lose your livelihood. Maybe there are a whole lot of real world consequences that flow downward for people who are actually involved in politics. And there aren't necessarily real world consequences, but it's a tough thing for somebody who has voted R their entire lives to then say, geez, I can't do that anymore right now. And, maybe not for forever, but for the foreseeable future, that's just not a thing I can do.
And everybody is sort of sitting around waiting for somebody else to do something, or the meteor to fall from, the sky that will solve this problem. It feels very much like 2015. So speaking of which, though, do you have some thoughts on Major League Baseball? Okay. You know where I'm going on this. So earlier this year, if I have the story straight, Trump called for a complete boycott of Major League Baseball because of whatever. Major League Baseball pulled the All-Star game from the state of Georgia, from Atlanta, in protest of its restrictive voting laws. And last night, not only of course, is Major League Baseball back in a big way in Atlanta with the World Series, but the commissioner invited the orange one to come. And so my social media feed is filled with Donald Trump there in all of his glory, in Atlanta at the World Series doing the tomahawk chop. So there's kind of a pattern here where institutions have decided that they're going to normalize Trump, right? They're going to normalize Trump. And no matter how much the threats and the insults are, it's going to be okay in the end, right? He gets what he wants.
Always.
Oh,
And
why?
I mean, because he owns a political party, and a political party is a very powerful thing. And he owns it in a way that no politician in our lifetimes has ever owned an American political party. Like, that just hasn't been the way things have worked. And, people had a hard time coming to understand that that was going to be the case. I was, back in September, I was writing, hey, when Donald Trump loses this election, and by the way, I mean September of last year. I was saying when Donald Trump loses this election, he's going to say that he won,
right?
And the Republican Party is all going to agree with him, and he's going to be the nominee in 2024. People told me I was nuts, and one of our good friends who knows more about has forgotten more about politics than I will ever know, said. He told me privately, he said, look, people hate losers, and they can smell this stuff. They're going to move on. They got to get power. That's all they care about. He'll be in yesterday's news. And I just said, I don't think that's true anymore. That's not what the Republican Party is. The Republican Party is not an organization of people seeking to amass power in order to enact policy goals. It is a lifestyle brand. Organized around a single person, which is interested in pursuing grievance and emotions and making themselves feel better.
Well, this is why punditry is so difficult these days, because, our friend who knows so much about politics, had a very plausible argument there because it was based on history. All history would suggest that that was what was going to happen. A disgraced one-term president generally fades from the scene if the past is in any way prologue. But as you're pointing out, it's no longer a reasonable guide because something has been deranged on the timeline.
Yeah,
and the rules are all different.
And again, it's because the voters that this is what the voters want. And so it feels to me like an end of history kind of moment where we are in the politics of decadence, where we have an entire political party that doesn't, again, really have any concrete policy goals. There aren't, they don't want to, which is, again, this is something that wasn't obvious. There were a lot of people who said, well, if he doesn't build the wall, people will turn on him. And it turns out, no, they didn't. His voters didn't want the wall. I mean, they were happy to say they wanted the wall because it made the people they hate angry, but they didn't actually need the wall to be built. It's really all about negative partisanship and a hatred of the other, in which the other is other people in America and not like people across the world.
So let's get to this whole argument about DeSantis, because I think this relates to this, that, the argument that, well, never Trumpers should get behind DeSantis because he's the only way of blocking Donald Trump. I think that sort of, misreads what never Trumpers are actually all about, that yeah, I mean, we'd like to beat Donald Trump again, but Trumpism, or whatever you want to call it, is also a significant problem. And one of the things that Trump has revealed was things that were already there. I mean, let's face it, Donald Trump was not an innovator. He tapped into a lot of things that were pre-existing conditions, and they have accelerated. So simply going to a cleaned up, more competent, less obviously lunatic fascist figure like Ron DeSantis doesn't really solve the problem, does it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, that Connor's column over the weekend really
Connor
just...
Friedersdorf, good guy, smart guy, writing this piece in the Atlantic saying that we should get behind Ron DeSantis.
Okay. Yeah, I think it just misreads literally everything. As you say, it misreads the sort of first principles, which is that none of this stuff is acceptable. Like, all of it leads, even if you downgrade to somebody like Ron DeSantis, you are leaving in place all the dynamics which make it possible to level back up to a full-blown demagogue who is willing to destroy democracy. Because, again, the anti-democratic aspects of Trumpism are not bugs, they are features. That's what they like. And you really got to, if you want to have a healthy Republican Party, which you should want, because democracy only works on the honor system. You need two healthy parties. Having one toxic party, which is anti-democratic, and one healthy, normal-ish party doesn't, that's a Band-Aid. So if you want to return to a healthy Republican Party, you got to get rid of this stuff, root and branch. But also the idea that the never Trumpers are going to help push candidate X over the top is the craziest thing in the world. I mean, for National Review to come out and anoint candidate X, whoever that is, as the future of the Republican Party would doom them. That would be the kiss of death
for the candidate. Yeah,
for the candidate. Yeah, because again, this is the voters, the base. They hate the elites, and they even hate the elites who are nominally on their side. And so, yeah, I just think it's great. And then, of course, it also misreads what DeSantis's motives are. I mean, DeSantis would never, there's no scenario in which Ron DeSantis would challenge Donald Trump for the 2024 nomination. I'm not even convinced, honestly, that DeSantis would be willing to challenge one of the Trump family members. So, I mean, let's just pretend we live in a universe in which Donald Trump hems and haws about whether he's going to run, and teases it all the way up in order to freeze the field. And then at the last minute, he substitutes Don Jr. in and says that Don Jr. is going to run. I don't think this is likely, but I'm just saying, let's pretend. I do not think Ron DeSantis would be willing to run against Don Jr. for the nomination.
And I'm not sure you could beat him in this particular environment, even though
I don't think you could
that
either.
isn't. But you know, your point earlier about that the real problem is the 74 million. I mean, see, this is the flaw in, and I think the incredible naivete on the part of some folks who believe that, well, Ron DeSantis would at least get us past Donald Trump, and would be less, existentially terrifying, which he is less existentially terrifying, in the way, I suppose, that drinking arsenic is less existentially terrifying than having your head put into a wood chipper. But anyway, the point is, though, that the leadership of the right is not at the top. These are all followers. And so the question is, who would greenlight these impulses? Donald Trump has, opened up, has given permission to all of these irritable gestures, et cetera. But so would Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis would not reel it in. He would not channel it into more constructive. Because they're all followers. And this is the key. Every one of these people are followers of the worst impulses in the Republican Party right now.
That's such a great point. And you really see it from talk radio world, right? I mean, all these guys who are anti-Trump, the Dennis Pragers of the world, right, and the Horowitzes of the world, they were anti-Trump so long as they thought that Trump could be beaten, and they thought that they were leading their listeners, and then it turned out that their listeners were in charge, and they had to follow them. And I think that's exactly the way it is at the electoral level too.
And I look at a lot of the political figures right now and ask myself, not what would they do, but what would they allow to happen? Would they stand against this tide? And the answer is no. I mean, would they, if the base demands that legislatures overturn the popular vote, would Republican candidate for governor, say in Wisconsin, say, no, that's the wrong thing to do? And no, I don't think that's the case anymore. Okay, so let's talk about Virginia. What's going to happen in Virginia, do you think?
I think Glenn Youngkin's going to win. I think there is a chance he could win quite bigly. I mean, the
7-8 points.
Yeah. I mean, the smart money is probably Youngkin +3. But if I was looking to make some money on this and I could find good odds for Youngkin +7, that's probably where I'd put my bet.
Okay.
And I've been writing about this. I went back and looked at this since May. I've been saying, hey, this guy Glenn Youngkin could win. Why aren't Democrats paying attention? I've been waving my arms about this. And it's very, very bad for Democrats, both in the state, very bad for Democrats nationally. Terrible omen for Biden. Should be a real wake-up call. Although, I mean, if they're not awake by now, I don't know what it would take to get them to be awake. And but my one note of caution is that I don't know that Youngkin is replicable for Republicans, because
why?
what Youngkin did was he ran as a very MAGA candidate, but he triangulated. So we had a super MAGA candidate, Amanda Chase. We had a super Rhino cuck establishment candidate in Pete Snyder. And Glenn Youngkin triangulated between them, and because he's a self-funder, was able to drop $16 million or whatever into the race and get himself the nomination. But because he was triangulating, he never had to go all the way on MAGA. He always left himself a sliver of deniability. And then once we got into the general election, he was like, Trump who?
Yeah.
Donald, what? I don't even.
He looks more. Okay, tell me, because obviously I'm in Wisconsin. You're right there, but he comes off more like a Mitt Romney than a Donald Trump.
Yeah, I would say that's very true. And honestly, there's a lot of like Mitt Romney 2012 to him, because don't forget, Mitt Romney, played footsie with the Trump birtherism stuff during the primaries, right? So he does all that, and I think that's a pretty winning position for Republicans. But so when I say not replicable, what I mean is that Youngkin never had to face a Republican primary electorate. And this is what everybody forgets. So Virginia had a primary in 2017, and they had the establishment guy, Ed Gillespie, who ran against this no-name Confederate-loving guy named Corey Stewart, who's actually from my town, who had no money. And the establishment guy won by 5,000 votes out of almost 400,000 votes cast. The Republican Party was freaked out about this. They saw the polling for Amanda Chase, who was the Trump and heels candidate for this, and they concocted this absolutely cockamamie primary system for this year, in which there were 39 drive-through sites where people voted in ranked choice, and some of the ballots were actually offloaded to state and party mechanisms at the local level. I mean, to look at the arcane rules on this, you couldn't believe it. And all of this was done to try to keep the Trump candidate out from winning the nomination, and it succeeded. I think that had this been an open voting primary, there's almost no chance that Youngkin could have won it. And if he did win it, he would have had to go so far out into Trump world that this primary campaign that he has waged, where he has basically said Trump who, would have been impossible. So again, this sounds like I'm trying to make excuses for Democrats. I'm really not. Like, they should be scared as hell. That said, I just don't think that this is as plug and play a solution for Republicans as they think, if that makes sense.
Okay, so it does make sense. So, but why is Terry McAuliffe on track to lose, assuming that you and I are both right about this, because I agree with you? Why in a state that went very heavily Democratic, that the conventional wisdom has been has been trending Democratic? Why would Democrats fail this year? Is it an issue? Is it the mood? What is your sense? What is the autopsy going to look like?
So the autopsy is going to say three things. The first is national environment. The national environment is terrible. You saw the poll out today for Biden, which has his approval rating at 42%, I think, minus 12 underwater. The wrong track number is over 70% nationally. All of the news out of D.C. since August really has been terrible for Democrats, starting with the surge of the Delta wave in late July, going through Afghanistan with inflation, supply chain. I mean, you can tell yourself, look, how many of these things are actually Joe Biden's fault? And some of them are, some of them aren't. But it doesn't matter to voters, right? Voters have just decided that this stuff is Biden's fault. So all of that has been a huge drag on McAuliffe. That's part one. Part two, McAuliffe has not been a great candidate. He's worked pretty hard, but he has had, I think, a pretty dim strategic view of the race and not run a very good race strategically. He committed a huge mistake in one of the debates where he said something about how parents shouldn't have final say over things. The school boards should. Again, we could debate on that all we want, but just as a matter of politics, that's bad politics. He shouldn't have said it.
It was a blunder.
So, and then on top of it, the third piece of this is that Youngkin is showing that in an off-year election, Trump is enormously helpful, because Trump and the big lie fire up the Republican base in ways which it would not be fired up if it was just Glenn Youngkin. Right, the people down in Halifax and Henrico, all the places that are going to wind up being big red Youngkin counties, they are turning out not because of Glenn Youngkin, but because of Donald Trump. He is on the ballot for them. And yet up in the blue counties in Northern Virginia and Triangle and down the Richmond metro area, Trump looks like the past, right? And you have people who are like, why should I worry about Donald Trump? We did that. The whole point of electing Joe Biden was that we didn't have to think about politics as an existential matter anymore. And so the Republicans really get the best of both worlds on this.
So last week, they had Democrats in Washington had a chance to throw a lifeline to Terry McAuliffe. Obviously, on Thursday, you have the president who goes to the Capitol and says, "You need to pass my infrastructure bill." Well, apparently, he didn't actually ask for the vote, which was, I don't know, political malpractice, whatever. But everything fell apart, and everything I'm reading is the McAuliffe people are looking around, going, "What the hell? How did we end up here under the bus? Why would they leave us? We needed a victory." So Democrats essentially send Joe Biden off to Rome empty-handed and leave Terry McAuliffe spinning in the wind of another terrible news cycle. I'm not saying that would have made a difference, but that's got to be one of those moments that people look back on and think, what was going on? Did Democrats not understand that falling apart on this or having the circular firing squad would have these implications in a high profile gubernatorial election?
And this, Charlie, this gets to Tim Miller's piece today over in the Bulwark. It's not just about yelling at the marginal Republicans saying, why aren't you guys taking this seriously? It's about yelling at the Democrats and saying, why don't you guys take it seriously that right now Donald Trump is the odds-on favorite to win in 2024? Because if you guys took it seriously and didn't pretend like, hey, Donald Trump was just another normal Republican, or hey, he's in the past, then you'd be doing stuff right now to make the Biden administration more successful. And that would be your overriding idea. And you wouldn't actually care about whether or not this thing was everything you wanted it to be. Or you would just say, look, we don't care. Let's pass it, move on, and get back to voting rights. Right. Let's get back to the Electoral Vote Count Act.
Yeah.
Let's start shoring up the system in case this guy winds up as president again. And the Democrats just seem to, as a party, even at the very top, even, in the Biden White House, to just assume that we are in a normal, ordinary political time. And God knows, I hope they're right. And I hope that people like you and me and Tim are wrong.
Yeah.
But I don't know, man.
I don't know either. So looking at some of these, okay, so before I get into the polls, you mentioned before that the consequences will be obviously negative for the Democrats if they lose in Virginia. Let's leave aside the implications for Virginia nationally. Will Democrats be so freaked out by this that they abandon the Biden agenda and that this delicate balance falls apart, or B, will they be shocked into a certain sobriety that they will in fact take this more seriously? What are you expecting?
Well, I mean, in general, I just expect the worst possible outcome all the time, and I'm rarely disappointed. So but I don't know. I mean, I could see it both ways. I could see this as being a slap to progressives. On the other hand, I could see progressives turning around and saying, well, your guys are the ones who nominated Terry McAuliffe. And if only you had nominated a real progressive warrior in Virginia, then it would have been different, which is insane, by the way.
Yeah.
Not true. It would not have been different. If anything, it would have been worse. I think Terry McAuliffe was probably the best available pick on the board for Dems. He had a high name ID. He was a successful recent governor. He was pretty moderate. I suppose you could make an argument that you could have gone to a fresh face or something, but not a fresh face with really progressive views. That would not have worked in this state because the state is only like +8. I know Biden won by +10, but that's because he was running against Trump, who was a really bad candidate. Naturally, the state is probably +7, +8. And I don't know. I mean, this is, Charlie, you and I ask ourselves this all the time. Do the Democrats not see all the same things that you and I are seeing?
No, I don't think they do. I don't think they do. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing some. And of course, we get negative feedback when we point this out. Okay, so let me give an example, though, of something that I think that we've seen that they've been in denial on. Every bit of commentary that I've heard from the left over the last couple of months is we don't understand why everybody doesn't get on board with this very, very progressive spending plan because they are wildly popular. Everything in this bill is wildly popular. Well, then we have this ABC poll yesterday that 70% of Americans, 69% of Americans say they know just some or little to nothing about what's in these two bills, and then nothing. And here's the killer. Americans don't feel these bills will help them or the economy if they become law. And again, this is the ABC News Ipsos poll found that a plurality, 32% of Americans, think the bills would hurt people like them if they pass. Fewer, only 25%, think the bills would help them. And about 18% think the bills would make no difference. 24% said they didn't know. So I don't know who they're going to point the fingers at, but Democrats have clearly done a terrible job of selling these ideas to the American public, of messaging these ideas to the American public. And I think they've been deluding themselves about how self-evidently popular they were.
I could not agree with you
Yeah.
more. The level of malpractice. I mean, let's just step back. Let's not even look at the prospective bills. Let's look at what they passed. The American Rescue Plan houses within it a child family tax credit, which is probably the most pro-family
Yeah.
policy which has been enacted by any administration in a generation. This puts money into the pockets of families with young kids, all the way from low income, all the way. Now it phases out over time, but you're getting real benefits all the way up to like the middle class, or even parts of the upper middle class. This should be something which is absolutely transformative for people, and which families and parents ought to know about and be thrilled about and wedded to, because it's not for forever. It's going to have to be reauthorized next year. And so this ought to be a club that Democrats can use against Republicans. Like, hey, we are the pro-family party. If you are a family with kids, we are the side that is giving you this money, which again is a tax credit. We're not giving you somebody else's money. We're letting you have your own money back. And this is a thing that if you want this to continue, you vote Democrat.
And this, by the way, would appeal to conservatives, Republican voters, centrists, who in fact, might think, hey, this is in my interest, and it is pro-family, pro-child.
I mean, anybody with a couple kids at home, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Instead, what we have parents who basically don't seem to know that it happens. But we have a whole bunch of old people, Republican voters who know about this, and they view it as welfare.
Yeah.
And they're angry about it. So again, you are the exact sour spot in messaging where you have this thing which should be wildly popular and which you should be able to run on. And the people who should like it don't know about it. And the people who may not like it have been messaged in the opposite direction by the Republicans to think that these are the new welfare queens somehow. And, God knows, I've been on lurking on Sarah focus groups where you hear Republican voters say, oh yeah, this is just, inciting people to go and have more kids. And so they refuse to work and they're just, making babies to get this money. And you're like, are you high? But this is what Fox is telling them. It's like the Trump on the ballot thing, right? It's, it's great for the Republican base and it's nothing for the Democratic base at this point. And
and in the bubble that the Democrats have created for themselves, and I understand the people will say, well, you're engaging in both sides, and well, both sides can make mistakes. That is a reality in their bubble. I would be interested to know what the media exposure of leaders of the Progressive Caucus were versus the amount of airtime spent explaining the concerns of centrists like Stephanie Murphy, a Democratic Congresswoman from Florida, why they might have some qualms about the spending. I understand that Kirsten Sinema doesn't want to talk to anybody, but every once in a while they'll stick a microphone in front of Joe Manchin, and I have to tell you, he sounds very reasonable, and yet you watch a lot of the cable shows, and you wouldn't think that there's any legitimate objections to any of that. And I think that guys like Joe Manchin, how about that? Joe Manchin, he sees this, he understands how this plays, and he's trying, I think, to tug the Democrats back to the center. And so I don't think that they see the same things that we're seeing.
Yeah, and my argument here would be, even if Manchin is wrong, who cares? If you are a Democrat and you are looking down the barrel of an anti-democratic Republican resurgence led by Donald Trump, it doesn't matter if Joe Manchin, let's just pretend
That's right.
he's objectively wrong.
Yeah.
You guys got to get moving and pass stuff, and you got to make Biden more popular, and you got to make the party more popular. So you just got to give Manchin whatever he wants. And I'm sorry, that's not fair, but life isn't fair.
Well, it's also arithmetic.
It's
just do the math, people. You haven't won enough elections to get everything you want, and the way you're behaving is not going to get you there. Okay, so JVL, the real reason that I wanted you to have you on the podcast, well, everything we've talked about, obviously, but I want to talk about Facebook for a few minutes here.
Yeah.
Because you had a piece last week that sort of looked at, and I will admit that it's hard to keep track of everything that's been coming out. Part of the problem is that sometimes the journalism is so comprehensive that it's hard to get your head around it. But I think you zeroed in on the key point, is that what we're learning about Facebook is even worse than we imagine, and we imagine pretty bad stuff. So just give me your sense of what we've learned about Facebook that turns out to be even worse than what critics had feared about it.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. But this is the interesting thing. It's bad, but not surprising.
Yeah.
So, it's one of the things where the details are shocking, but the overall story is exactly what you would expect it to be. And the overall story is that Facebook has been prioritizing growth above everything else. They don't care what they have to do to grow. And that in the context of that, a bunch of bad things have happened. This is what we've been learning from the details of from the Facebook papers, the Frances Haugen documents, which she smuggled out. It's everything from Facebook being used to facilitate human trafficking to stoking political violence. There are a couple of really interesting use cases where Facebook went through trying to understand what their own platform was doing, because in many ways Facebook behaves like a black box that the people who work there don't even understand what comes out of it. And so in 2019 they set up a new user. They described her name was Carol Smith. They described her as politically conservative mother in Wilmington, North Carolina. They said that she was interested in politics, parenting, and Christianity, and they followed a couple mainstream brands like Fox and Donald Trump. And they didn't do anything then. They just let the algorithm start doing its own thing. And 2 days later, Facebook was pushing her to join QAnon groups.
That didn't take long.
Right. And they did the same thing in India. And they set up a user in India just as a person living in Kerala. And all they did was, for this experiment, was they said, we're going to follow every recommendation that the algorithm gives us. So, if the algorithm tells me to join this group or watch this video or go to this page, I'm going to do it. And within like 3 weeks, it was sending to like absolute celebrations of political violence, pictures of dead bodies, and like incitement to actual violence. And this is, this stuff it's happening because it works.
Right.
And Facebook is optimized to push people in really negative and toxic directions, because that's how you get engagement. And Facebook only cares about engagement.
So these are foreseeable outcomes. I mean, this is the defense, of course, of Facebook would be, well, they're just the town square, and this is, other forces are happening and other things are taking place, and we just, sit back and, are in some ways collateral damage. That's simply not true, is it?
No,
it's simply not true.
Facebook is it's a mirror, but it's a funhouse mirror, because again, it's optimized for, it's not just reflecting things back at you. It is optimized to get the reflections that are going to juice a very specific kind of engagement for them, because that's what they can then monetize.
So, as we step back and take the 35,000 foot view of all of this, I can't, how many of our discussions and articles have been written about, how American politics has gone crazy, how the right has lost its mind, why there is so much anger, how conspiracy theories have become central to our politics. It really is impossible to tell this story without talking about what Facebook is doing to us, that it is actually central to the story of the derangement of American politics. Would you agree?
I think that's true. And this is true of all social.
I was in denial about this, I have to admit. I actually made the argument at one time that, we have this huge supply of misinformation. We can't do anything about that. We have to do something on the demand side by making people smarter, wiser, savvier. Well, I look back on that and go, boy, that was very naive, given the power of these networks.
I mean, it's not just Facebook. I mean, Twitter does an aspect of this, Facebook does an aspect of this, and YouTube does a very large aspect of this. And they each do different things. Twitter really pushes the elites in different ways because Twitter is largely an elite echo bubble. YouTube spreads very serious misinformation. I mean, the truth is, as a fire hose of misinformation, YouTube is worse than just about every place else. But Facebook connects the people together to make them feel powerful and to convince them that this thing that they're looking to join, whether it's a group doing violent insurrections in Myanmar and carrying out genocides in Myanmar, or people who are getting involved with the Michigan anti-mask protests, it pushes them together and allows them to organize in ways that YouTube doesn't. And so, again, this is why when we talk about the influence of social and technology on our politics, I think you really have to talk platform specifically, because what you would need to do to Facebook to detoxify it would be different than what you would need to do to YouTube or need to do to Twitter.
So let's, in the few minutes we have left, I want to get your take on where we're at in the pandemic. You have been tracking the pandemic in your newsletter. I'm going to be getting my booster shot on Wednesday. That's the good news. What do you see as the trajectory at the moment? The vaccine mandates are kicking in. We see the vaccine protests, but the numbers seem to be pretty high. I'm looking at New York City. We're getting a lot of attention to the people who are the holdouts, but you're looking at in the area of 90+ % of the employees actually getting the vaccine. So where are we at right now? What do you think?
So, I mean, things are a little bit better. They're not great. We're still 1,300 people or so dying every day, about 73,000 new cases every day. The reason to be a little bit optimistic, if you want it to be optimistic, is that we have boosters rolling out more widely. And we also have kid vaccines, so kids ages 5 through 11. I suspect that the uptake on the kids' vaccines will be even slower than it is for normal vaccines, because everybody gets, it's one thing to say, I'm going to make a decision for myself. People get a little more squirrely when they say, I'm making decisions for my kid. But so there are going to be a lot of kids getting vaccinated, and that will help just reduce the pool of people who can be vectors. That's good. On the other hand, we're coming into flu season, and if you just look at the charts, in October of 2000, we began a huge uptick, and the numbers, having been declining since September, are flattening out right now, and maybe we're about to begin a winter surge. So, I mean, I look at all this and I think to myself, not great, Bob.
Well, I had the really strong sense over the weekend, though, being out and about, that the public has given up on this, though.
Yes.
The American people have decided it's over, it's done. Areas where I would have normally expected to see lots of masking, down to almost zero. So, I mean, that plays into all of this, that whatever alarms have been sounded and continue to be sounded, people are just done with it.
Yeah. And you know what's going to happen this week, Charlie? This week, we're going to go over 750,000 deaths.
Yeah. 5 million worldwide. Yeah.
750,000. And those are just the official numbers here in America. The real, I mean, I keep saying this. It's going to take a very large act of forensic accounting once this is all over to go back and, I assume that the epidemiologists will do this to figure out what the true number was. And it'll probably be anywhere between 20 or 50% higher than the official case total right now. And I just, do people even realize that? Do people realize that we're looking at 750,000 American deaths? And I don't know. I just feel like we're not going to fully start appreciating the consequences of this for a while, because like those deaths, a lot of those people are voters. How are those distributed? Are they distributed equally between the Democratic and Republican side of the pie? I don't know that.
Unlikely.
Yeah. How are they distributed geographically? Could it be that Arizona becomes a little bit easier for either Democrats or Republicans because of COVID deaths? I don't know, but it seems possible. And so it's just, I don't know, the extent to which COVID is the story of our time, I still think has been not fully appreciated by people. The ramifications of this will take a decade or more.
and you see the way that things become normalized. The horrible becomes normal, because I'm trying to imagine if we were having this conversation back in April or May of last year, thinking how many Americans might die. And I think that we would have said, well, gosh, if it was 100,000 or 200,000, it would be just an almost unimaginable catastrophe. And yet here we are with over 700,000. I mean,
I wonder, is it, part of it certainly is normalization, but part of it is it shows just how bad faith so many people are. So, you think back to the early days when we were looking at like 3 deaths a day or 12 deaths a day, and people would say, oh, we're not even at 1,000 dead. You remember this? Like,
yeah, I do.
This is
very
what it was
well.
like, and you are saying the sky is falling. It's not even, and there was a real question, like, do these people just not understand, or do they understand and they're just going to keep sliding the scale? And it turns out that almost all of those people, they would say the same thing at 200,000. They would say the same thing at 500,000, and they're saying the same thing at 750,000. They were never going to take this seriously because it was an article of faith for them.
And if it was double that or triple that, I think that would still apply. So for people who are Bulwark Plus subscribers, you know that you not only get my morning shots, you also get JVL's Triad every single day. You have access to other podcasts, including The Next Level, including The Secret Podcast. What is your Triad? Can you give us a little bit of a preview what your Triad is for this Monday? This Monday in November.
So today, Monday, I'm talking about Virginia race and what the lessons of Youngkin are for Republicans and for Democrats. I try to keep it pretty short, 3 things to read every day, which is why I've called the Triad. So hit 1, 2, 3, try to make people smarter, help them see around corners a little bit. I would say, just, since it's just us here, I could brag on myself. I think I've been pretty early to most of the big stories of our time. I was ringing the bell on COVID in February of 2020. And, I was telling people that Donald Trump was going to A, lose, and B, say that he won, and C, run again. I was telling people that Glenn Youngkin had a very good chance to beat Terry McAuliffe months ago. So I think it's a place to help people see around corners in politics.
No, I think that's worth the price of admission, to see around corners and to see things, because I remember your warnings about what was going to happen on January 6th, and of course the whole election denialism, while the rest of the punditocracy was prepared to move on. So check it out. It is the Triad. We have multiple newsletters and multiple podcasts. JVL, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Charlie.
And thank you all for listening to today's Bulwark podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. We'll be back tomorrow, and we will do this all over again.